In what sense may Satan be said to consider the people of God? Certainly not in the usual biblical meaning of the term consider. O Lord, consider my trouble. Consider my meditation. Blessed is he that considereth the poor. Such consideration implies goodwill and a careful inspection of the object of benevolence with regard to a wise distribution of favor. In that sense, Satan never considers any. If he has any benevolence, it must be towards himself, but all his considerations of other creatures are of the most malevolent kind. No meteoric flash of good flits across the black midnight of his soul. Nor does he consider us as we are told to consider the works of God, that is, in order to derive instruction as to God's wisdom and love and kindness. He does not honor God by what he sees in his works or in his people. It is not with him, go to the ant, consider her ways, and be wise. But he goes to the Christian and considers his ways and becomes more foolishly God's enemy than he was before. The consideration which Satan pays to God's saints is upon this wise. He regards them with wonder when he considers the difference between them and himself. A traitor, when he knows the thorough villainy and the blackness of his own heart, cannot help being astounded when he is forced to believe another man to be faithful. The first resort of a treacherous heart is to believe that all men would be just as treacherous, and are really so at bottom. The traitor thinks that all men are traitors like himself, or would be, if it paid them better than fidelity. When Satan looks at the Christian, and finds him faithful to God and to his truth, he considers him as we should consider a phenomenon, perhaps despising him for his folly, but yet marveling at him and wondering how he can act thus. I, he seems to say, a prince, a peer of God's parliament, would not submit my will to Jehovah. I thought it better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. I kept not my first estate, but fell from my throne. How is it that these stand? What grace is it which keeps these? I was a vessel of gold, and yet I was broken. These are earthen vessels, but I cannot break them. I could not stand in my glory. What can be the matchless grace which upholds them in their poverty, in their obscurity, in their persecution, still faithful to the God who doth not bless and exalt them as he did me? It may be that he also wonders at their happiness. He feels within himself a seething sea of misery. There is an unfathomable gulf of anguish within his soul, and when he looks at believers, he sees them quiet in their souls, full of peace and happiness, and often without any outward means by which they should be comforted, yet rejoicing and full of glory. He goes up and down through the world and possesses great power, and there be many myrmidons to serve him, yet he hath not the happiness of spirit possessed by yonder humble cottager, obscure, unknown, having no servants to wait upon her, but stretched upon the bed of weakness. He admires and hates the peace which reigns in the believer's soul. His consideration may go farther than this. Do you not think that he considers them to detect, if possible, any flaw and fault in them, by way of solace to himself? They are not pure, saith he. These blood-bought ones, these elect from before the foundations of the world. They still sin. These adopted children of God, for whom the glorious Son bowed his head and gave up the ghost, even they offend. How much he chuckle, with such delight as he is capable of, over the secret sins of God's people, and if he can see anything in them inconsistent with their profession, anything which appear to be deceitful, and therein like himself, he rejoices. Each sin born in the believer's heart cries to him, my Father, and he feels something like the joy of fatherhood as he sees his foul offspring. He looks at the old man in the Christian, and admires the tenacity with which it maintains its hold, the force and vehemence with which it struggles for the mastery, the craft and cunning with which every now and then, at set intervals, at convenient opportunities, it putteth forth all its force. He considers our sinful flesh, and makes it one of the books in which he diligently reads. One of the fairest prospects, I doubt not, which the devil's eye ever rests upon, is the inconsistency and the impurity which he can discover in the true child of God. In this respect, he had very little to consider in God's true servant, Job. Nor is this all, but rather just the starting point of his consideration. We doubt not that he views the Lord's people, and especially the more eminent and excellent among them, as the great barriers to the progress of his kingdom. And just as the engineer, endeavoring to make a railway, keeps his eye very much fixed upon the hills and rivers, and especially upon the great mountain through which it will take years laboriously to bore a tunnel, so Satan, in looking upon his various plans to carry on his dominion in the world, considers most such men as Job. Satan must have thought much of Martin Luther. I could ride the world over, says he, if it were not for that monk. He stands in my way. That strong-headed man hates and mauls my firstborn son, the Pope. If I could get rid of him, I would not mind though 50,000 smaller saints stood in my way. He is sure to consider God's servant, if there be none like him, if he stand out distinct and separate from his fellows. Those of us who are called to the work of the ministry must expect from our position to be the special objects of his consideration. When the glass is at the eye of that dreadful warrior, he is sure to look out for those who by their regimentals are discovered to be the officers, and he bids his sharpshooters be very careful to aim at these. For, saith he, if the standard-bearer fall, then shall the victory be more readily gained to our side, and our opponents shall be readily put to rout. If you are more generous than other saints, if you live nearer to God than others, as the birds peck most at the ripest fruit, so may you expect Satan to be most busy against you. Who cares to contend for a province covered with stones and barren rocks, and icebound by frozen seas? But in all times there is sure to be a contention after the fat valleys where the wheat sheaves are plenteous, and where the husbandman's toil is well requited. And thus, for you who honor God most, Satan will struggle very sternly. He wants to pluck God's jewels from his crown, if he can, and take the Redeemer's precious stones even from the breastplate itself. He considers, then, God's people. Viewing them as hindrances to his reign, he contrives methods by which he may remove them out of his wave, or turn them to his own account. Darkness would cover the earth if he could blow out the lights. There would be no fruit to shake like Lebanon, if he could destroy that handful of corn upon the top of the mountains. Hence his perpetual consideration is to make the faithful fail from among men. It needs not much wisdom to discern that the great object of Satan in considering God's people is to do them injury. I scarcely think he hopes to destroy the really chosen and blood-bought heirs of life. My notion is that he is too good a divine for that. He has been foiled so often when he has attacked God's people that he can hardly think he shall be able to destroy the elect. For you remember the soothsayers who are very nearly related to him spoke to Haman on this wise. If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. He knows right well that there is a seed royal in the land against whom he fights in vain, and it strikes me if he could be absolutely certain that any one soul was chosen of God, he would scarcely waste his time in attempting to destroy it, although he might seek to worry and to dishonor it. It is, however, most likely that Satan no more knows who God's elect are than we do, for he can only judge as we do by outward actions, though he can form a more accurate judgment than we can through longer experience, and being able to see persons in private where we cannot intrude. Yet into God's book of secret decrees his black eye can never peer. By their fruits he knows them, and we know them in the same manner. Since, however, we are often mistaken in our judgment, he too may be so, and it seems to me that he therefore makes it his policy to endeavor to destroy them all, not knowing in which case he may succeed. He goeth about seeking whom he may devour, and, as he knows not whom he may be permitted to swallow up, he attacks all the people of God with vehemence. Someone may say, how can one devil do this? He does not do it by himself alone. I do not know that many of us have ever been tempted directly by Satan. We may not be notable enough among men to be worth his trouble, but he has a whole host of inferior spirits under his supremacy and control, and as the centurion said of himself, so he might have said of Satan. He saith to this spirit, do this, and he doeth it, and to his servant, go, and he goeth. Thus all the servants of God will more or less come under the direct or indirect assaults of the great enemy of souls, and that with a view of destroying them, for he would, if it were possible, deceive the very elect. Where he cannot destroy, there is no doubt that Satan's object is to worry. He does not like to see God's people happy. I believe the devil greatly delights in some ministers, whose tendency in their preaching is to multiply and foster doubts and fears, and grief and despondency, as the evidences of God's people. Ah, saith the devil, preach on. You are doing my work well, for I like to see God's people mournful. If I can make them hang their harps on the willows and go about with miserable faces, I reckon I have done my work very completely. My dear friends, let us watch against those specious temptations which pretend to make us humble, but which really aim at making us unbelieving. Our God takes no delight in our suspicions and mistrusts. See how he proves his love in the gift of his dear Son Jesus. Banish then all your ill surmisings and rejoice in unmoved confidence. God delights to be worshipped with joy. O come, let us sing unto the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving, and make a joyful noise unto him with psalms. Rejoice in the Lord, ye righteous, and shout for joy, all ye that are upright in heart. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say, rejoice. Satan does not like this. Martin Luther used to say, "Let us sing psalms and spite the devil." And I have no doubt Martin Luther was pretty nearly right, for that lover of discord hates harmonious, joyous praise. Beloved brother, the arch-enemy wants to make you wretched here, if he cannot have you hereafter, and in this, no doubt, he is aiming a blow at the honor of God. He is well aware that mournful Christians often dishonor the faithfulness of God by mistrusting it, and he thinks if he can worry us until we no more believe in the constancy and goodness of the Lord, he shall have robbed God of his praise. He that offereth praise glorifieth me, says God, and so Satan lays the axe at the root of our praise, that God may cease to be glorified.